Welcome back to Frameworks. Today we're going to tackle a myth that creeps into both coaching and life, the idea that if something is simple, it also must be easy. So what's the truth? Some of the simplest things are also the hardest. Simplicity strips away distractions. It leaves you face to face with the work with nowhere to hide. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore why we often run toward complexity, not because it's better, but because it gives us a place to hide and sometimes even an excuse. And we're going to break down the frameworks that show how this plays out in program design, in coaching, as well in life. So let's get into it. Something that I think can be quite profound to a lot of coaches listening today is this idea that simplicity reveals the truth. And on the other side, complexity can disguise it. As coaches, our job isn't to impress with a bunch of layers of novelty, with a lot of complexity. It's to design with clarity, principles, and honesty. The simplest prescription often demands the most courage to actually give to your clients, because when we give our clients something that is simple, we're always butting up against this idea. And I don't care who you are as a coach. Maybe you've been doing this for quite some time and you just don't care anymore. But a lot of coaches are always butting up against this idea of, if my client sees it as simple, they will not see it as good. If my client can't get lost in a bunch of complexity, they don't think that I put a lot of thought into this prescription. So I really want to ground this episode in just this idea and thought experiment of how can we try to be as simple as we can with all of the prescriptions that we give. Okay, so throughout this episode, I'm just going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the power of simplicity and how it's actually challenging, in my opinion, even more challenging as a coach to understand something to a very, very deep degree and still be able to dial it back and prescribe with just a bunch of simplicity. Okay, so the first framework that I want to talk about today is this idea or concept that simplicity can actually strip away the noise. Okay, so as I walk through this framework, I just want to, and I'll do this for the next two as well, I want to kind of correlate these frameworks to just everyday life, not just training. Okay, so where in life can we strip away noise and be better off? One example is, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, sometimes we have to say no to a bunch of things. So just to get really tangible here, maybe there's 11 things on your docket, on your calendar, on your to-do list, and you have to say no to 10 of those things to really focus on the one thing that really matters, the thing that's going to have the most amount of impact. Okay, so all of my productivity people out there that try to be as productive as possible, I think you know what I mean when I say that, right? Like you can fill your calendar up with a dozen things every single day, but if you don't have that one thing on your calendar that's like circled, highlighted and saying like, this is the thing that's going to move me forward or going to equal progression for my day, we're just going to get just essentially deafened by all of the noise around those other 10 or 11 things that we can do or focus on. Now, looking at this as a concept in training, something I want to talk about, and we could go really deep here and we could probably do a series of episodes, not just an episode on this, but the beauty in simplicity in cyclical aerobic work. Okay. So cyclical aerobic work is very, very simple. Yes, we can make it complex, but just bear with me for a second. Imagine that we're doing intervals on the bike erg and we're going 2 minutes on and 2 minutes off, and we're doing that times 5 sets, and then we're resting a little bit, and then we're doing that times 2 blocks. Okay. That is very, very simple. Okay. So there's nothing to mask our effort there. Nothing to mask our effort. Our output every single interval is staring us right in the face. So we're looking at that monitor and we're just looking at wattage, right? We're kind of, we might have a goal in mind and we see us kind of floating around that goal, but it's there. The truth is just staring us in the face. And if the goal for those 2 minutes is to kind of push threshold a little bit, you guys could probably imagine what that's going to feel like. Although it's a very simple prescription, it's tough. That is not easy. So if you give your client that 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off times 5, rest 5 minutes times 2 blocks, they might open up their Coach RX and see that and be like, oh my gosh, this was like 3 lines of text. This looks really simple. And when they do it, they're like, oh my gosh, that was extremely challenging if they hit that with the appropriate effort. Okay. Compare that to a different piece. So let's compare, apples to apples-ish. Let's say it's a 2 minute mixed interval. And let's say that we're doing, 10 no push-up burpees, 10 box jump step downs. And in the remaining time, we're just doing, max calories on the bike erg, right? Like if you're really strong and really powerful, you could probably make that pretty challenging, but anyone can make the cyclical intervals of 2 on, 2 off extremely challenging, but only some can make that mixed piece challenging because of turnover and so on and so forth. They just might end up on that bike and there's 30 seconds left, and because it's aerobic, they can't really push as hard as they possibly can. So that's just a scenario or an example of sometimes complexity actually makes the task at hand easier. Okay. So I just want you guys to think about that and how, we can fall in love with this idea of simplicity because we don't have to deal with any other noise. We just have this thing in front of us and we're going to go. And I gave that example of the 2 minutes on, 2 minute off interval, but we can give a lot of training examples, right? Just think about this. You come in, let's look at resistance training. You come in and let's say that you're fairly strong. You have a pretty big back squat, okay, relative to you. And you open up your Coach RX and all it says, and this could be scary, all it says is you're going to do 8 sets of back squats times 3 reps. And you want it to be, let's look at percentages. You want it to be 90% or above of your 1 rep max. That is very, very simple. It's just an A. All I'm doing is 8 sets, but that 8 sets might take you an hour, right? Because the effort in every single repetition is so close to your maximum that simplicity equaled probably one of the most challenging back squat sessions you've ever done, right? But we can do like an A1, A2, A3, A4, and we can have back squat as A1, and then we have 4 or 3 other movements in a superset or giant set format. And then in our brains, what are we thinking? We're saying, hey, I need to dial this back a little bit on the back squat because I have 3 other exercises to do. So it's more complex than just the 8 sets times 3 reps, but it's actually easier because we have an excuse. We give ourselves an excuse, and it's a valid excuse. You have a lot of other work to do. It's going to be metabolic, so you're not really pushing as hard as you possibly can or at that 90+% of your 1 rep max in each one of your sets on the back squat, right? So that's just one idea or a couple ideas, but just really think through how you can just make your designs in your life as simple as possible and how that may equal better results. I think it actually is going to equal better results in a lot of scenarios, especially when we're hyper focusing on getting a single task done or adapting to a single characteristic. But not only how much better it can make you, but also how much more effort you have to put into that thing when you strip away the noise. Framework number 2 is this idea that complexity gives you a place to hide. And I'm kind of just building off of framework 1, right? Simplicity makes us hyper focus on a task. Complexity gives us an excuse to focus on a bunch of different tasks. Okay, so let's just continue with these themes of back squatting and productivity. So in life, busy work feels productive, but it avoids the hard thing, that one hard thing that you really have to get done, right? Anyone that's read any productivity book out there, all of them say essentially the same thing. And they say something fairly profound, right? Get the thing that's most important to you done first, right? I think that's called like eating the frog, okay? So whether that's having the meeting you don't want to have, answering the email you don't want to answer, building the course that you don't want to build, doing your monthly accounting when you don't want to do your monthly accounting, whatever that is, right? Sometimes we hide with a lot of other things that we have to do. Like, oh, I got to do this thing and I got to do that thing and I got to check my emails and I got to do this and I got to do that. And it's like that one glaring thing is just looking at you and it's saying, dude, you got to get me done. Okay. So sometimes we can cover up the most important thing with a lot of busy work. Okay. So that's in terms of life for productivity, but in training, let's stick with the squat. Okay, so we started the last framework talking about the back squat. Let's stick with that. Let's think about a different variation, a 1 1/4 squat, right? Sometimes we might not want to work as hard and instead we say, hey, I want to focus on positions or I want to give myself a barrier. So I'm going to do a 1 1/4 squat. It lets us load less weight. Maybe we feel the burn in our muscles and that's tough, but it's just not as CNS demanding or as just hard as a tough 3 reps in the back squat. So just compare those two things, just imagine what they would feel like, a tough 3 reps in the 1 1/4 versus a tough 3 reps in just a straight back squat. The straight back squat, we're going to be able to lift more weight, so it's just going to be harder. It's going to be more demand on our nervous system. It's going to be tougher to recover. Yes, the 1 1/4 might give us some pump in the quads and it might feel positionally or posturally tougher, but we're just not digging as deep, okay? So we can actually use that to our advantage. I'm not saying that complexity is always a bad thing. All I'm saying is that complexity sometimes gives us a place to hide when we shouldn't hide from that thing that we're hiding from. Okay. But we could use complexity also. I'll just use this scenario in the 1 1/4 squat versus the back squat. If you wanted someone to kind of deload a little bit and not push as hard, right? This is a really good strategy or tactic. Hey, I want you to 1 1/4 squat instead of back squat. Still going to do a tough 3. It's still going to be challenging, but it's not going to take as much out of you because I'm putting in this little complex piece in this thing. And then the last consideration, as it has to do with just doing simple things and being married to the simple over complex in life, right? Like anyone that has coached someone in lifestyle and nutrition, we know the simplest work is usually the hardest work. Okay. You're probably like, what do you mean by that? You just said something different in the last 2 frameworks. Just bear with me for a second. In life, eating whole foods, going to bed on time, moving every day, none of that is complex, but it's brutally hard for a lot of people to do with a great amount of consistency. Okay. They're very simple habits, but it's challenging for people to do for whatever reason. Okay. Someone's reason might be, I value Netflix over feeling good in the morning. For others, it's I value the sweetness and the saltiness of those foods over feeling good tomorrow, right? We can lay out a lot of things, but usually it comes down to, the value exchange just isn't there for people. Even though it's really simple, it's like, dude, maybe eat less food and eat quality whole foods. I mean, that's going to be better for you. But for a lot of people, that's just challenging because they're dealing with whatever demons they're dealing with, right? And I don't say that in a flippant way, because people actually do deal with things when it comes to addiction, when it comes to food, when it comes to self-confidence, a lot of things, right? But we have to understand what it is they're dealing with, and we have to address that and not try to cover it up with something that's really complex in terms of, well, this isn't working for you, so I'm just going to go to the next step and find something a little more complex because maybe it will. Okay, we all have to just agree on, and I think I'm not saying anything profound here, the hardest work is usually the simplest work, okay? Or the simple work is usually the hardest thing for someone to do with any amount of consistency. When we take that to training, right? We could look at like pull-ups versus kipping pull-ups. And I'm not saying when we're training for time and stuff like that. And I'm not saying like butterfly pull-ups versus strict pull-ups. I just mean like using some momentum, okay? Strict pull-ups expose your true strength. Kipping adds a little bit of complexity. Maybe there's some rhythm that you're getting into, with your kind of humping back and forth, but you're escaping or you're hiding from the raw truth of how strong you actually are. Okay. And I know that's kind of a nominal example, but you can kind of see where I'm going from, or where I'm coming from when I say that, right? Like the hardest work is usually the simplest. A strict pull-up is an extremely simple exercise. And when we start to look at frameworks, principles, truths, whatever we want to call it, we always come back to this idea of the simplest are the most effective. The tried and true are the most effective. Walking a bunch of steps per day, just moving, right? Not being married to steps specifically, but just moving constantly and consistently is very simple, but not easy for a lot of people. Okay. That's going to have a profound effect on someone's energy, the amount of sun that they get, blood flow, their ability to recover, versus biohacking their recovery and saying like, hey, dude, I need 11 minutes per week in cold exposure, right? It's very simple, but it takes a little bit of time, more time than the 11 minutes per week. And it's not easy for a lot of people. It might feel like a bigger commitment for people. So although just moving constantly, 10, 15, 20 minute walk after every meal. So you're walking, an hour plus per day, or just moving an hour plus per day. Like people are just going to say, hey, I don't have time for that. Okay. It's very simple, but it's not easy for a lot of people to, in their own heads, to make time for that. MAP 10 cyclical work, right? Getting on a bike, getting on a rower versus, tough HIIT training, every day. Right. The MAP 10 cyclical work, it might be too much time for people. It might be too boring for people, not as entertaining, all of those things. And the HIIT stuff, it's like, dude, it's just fun. Like, I just love to sweat. I love to move with friends, whatever the case is. I get that. but sometimes the simplest thing is the best thing for us, is the most effective thing. If we all walked a ton and did a bunch more MAP 10 work on a day-by-day basis, we'd be much better off as a society. I would also, say that, yes, if people just did like a bunch of HIIT training instead of staying on their couches and doing nothing, they'd probably be better off. But from what we see, empirically, when people go from couch to that stuff, they just don't continue to do it because it hurts. It's not fun over the long term, and they just can't sustain it over a long period of time. When we look at strength training, we know that absolute strength work, deadlift, strict press, bench press, squats, all those things. I know some camps say that stuff will kill you, but we know that stuff is tried, it's true, it's effective, and it gets the job done, right? There's a bunch of models of resistance training that we can do, right? We can do a push-pull leg split. We can do drop sets. We can do a power hypertrophy split. We can name any other program in the world after that. We can do all of those things. But when we come back to just the simplest and baseline things, that's going to get the most results for the most people. And trust me when I say this, I'm all about all of those complex programs. I enjoy it, right? Like I geek out over those things, but I have to remind myself over and over and over, dude, do not get too far away from the principles. Do not get too far from the simple things that work. All right, so how do you actually add these frameworks in your own practice? Number one, maybe audit your program design. So pull up Coach X, look at what you're designing for people. You guys like how I say that? Like I'm just assuming everyone uses Coach X. If you're not, go ahead and sign up for your free trial. You should be using Coach X. Okay, all right, back to frameworks. Okay, audit your designs in Coach X and make sure that you're not designing programs for complexity's sake, or to entertain your clients. Or are you looking at your programs right now and you're like, no, these are pretty tried and true. I'm staying really close to principles, right? If it's the latter, good job, keep doing that thing. But even when you sit down and you find yourself just like thinking of new things to do for the sake of novelty, just second guess that. Maybe that isn't appropriate. That's a sign of you actually moving further away from principles. And I'm assuming you understand the principles. Okay. Number two, really lean into simplicity. Program cyclical work, right? Like take your clients through just like some very simple, not easy, right? Very simple cyclical work. Okay. Do some foundational absolute strength programs, right? Don't think that you need to have an A1 through, E2 in every program. Program some A, B's, and C's and see what that does for your client. Okay. Work on foundational habits, just very simple habits that are going to move your clients forward. Okay. These are harder, but more honest. And I'm saying that they're simple, but I'm saying that they're harder. Okay. The reason why they're harder is because I think we talk ourselves into thinking it's not the right thing. I need to do something a little more complex. We say it all the time. You need to meet your client where they are. If your client's training age is 16 weeks, it's like, guys, you don't need to do a bunch of drop sets, cluster sets, power hypertrophy training programs, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to do all that stuff. Just stick to the most basic things and fall in love with those basic things, create some consistency in those things, and you will be surprised, maybe not, but you'll be surprised with the progress that you see with just these simple designs, okay? Coach the reality, help clients understand why the simple prescription is the most effective one. Frame it as facing the truth, not chasing variety for variety's sake. And, our clients or your clients have to enjoy what they're doing in training. So I'm not discounting that either. So it needs to be, a jockeying for position and a back and forth, trying to understand what your clients actually enjoy and meeting them where they are, right? So it's like simplicity, not novelty, but you just want to make sure that they're actually enjoying what they're doing. So in that case, you're not programming to entertain, but you're programming so your client stays connected. Okay, so those are two different concepts, connection versus entertainment. Okay, just to close this out, guys, simple does not mean easy. I think I've kind of beat that point to death, but as coaches, our responsibility is to strip away the noise, prescribe what matters, and stand in the uncomfortable simplicity with our clients. And I'm saying that very specifically because I know that taking this simple approach can be really uncomfortable because it seems like you're not putting the time, energy, effort, and you're just like kind of stream of consciousness, just giving your clients a bunch of simple prescriptions. That's actually a good thing. Okay. So don't fall into that trap of just like second guessing and third guessing everything that you're doing because you don't think that it's complex enough. When we choose simplicity, we choose the long game. Okay. We choose truth. and we choose where real growth is going to go, or we at least lead our clients into that real growth. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me on this one, guys. I could have probably went a little bit longer in some of these areas around simplicity, because there's a lot of branches that I kind of wrote down and looked at in terms of, we can go this direction or that direction. And I'll definitely be hitting this in upcoming episodes, but I just wanted to use this as just kind of an intro to this idea and concept of how simple does not equal easy. So thanks for joining me, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Whatever the case is, I would really appreciate you guys to, if you're listening to this on a podcast, go ahead and subscribe to this podcast. If you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, subscribe to this channel if you're not subscribed already. And as always, let's stay connected in the comments. Thanks, guys.